World and how it impacts on South Africa. Before we get to the packages and inserts, our SABC's economics editor, Thandeka Gqubule, sat down with Yu-Shan Wu from the South African Institute of International Affairs. She first asked her to describe the nature of South Africa's current relationship with China.
Well, I think it's important to understand the context of the relationship. I mean, South Africa has had a diplomatic relationship with China since 1998, formally. I think relations has really developed very rapidly. If we think about just 10 years later, China became South Africa's largest trading partner. So I think, yes, I think in the economic aspect, in probably the high politics, you see a close relationship, but I think there are also areas where there's, that the relationship is still developing. So specifically, and I think, interesting for the public is to understand the engagement between people, which I think is still something that is still developing, and both sides understand that and recognize that as an issue in the relationship.
There's concern in South Africa about job losses due to dumping, for example, in the steel industry. Surely South Africans have a right to be concerned?
I mean, this is not the only, I think, industry or area that we've seen this. I know there were concerns previously about textiles, so it's manufacturing as well. But I think it's important, again, to put the South Africa-China relationship into context, because, I mean, I think we can talk about, the fact that we are concerned about job losses, etc. But it's also understanding how we can diversify our economy and compete globally, because I think that's what we noticed with the textiles, for example. Lots of studies talk about how there was a period where China decided not to export as much textiles to South Africa, but then what happens is we look to other Southeast Asian countries to import those goods. So how do we actually deal, I think, with that is important.
How do we deal with such a big power as equals?
When you start looking into the economic relationship, it's interesting because we can talk about trade and the fact that South Africa, it's not just, I think, we talk about trade deficits, for example, it's not just concerns over China, but I think many of our trading partners. So it's, I think, addressing those kind of domestic questions and how we compete globally again. But also what was interesting, I think, is that for quite some time, South African investments were larger in China versus Chinese investments in South Africa. So I think that's possibly an area where we need to look at increasing the, investments in South Africa. And we're starting to see this. We saw announcements last year of China buying stakes in, for example, media, possibly a multi-use residential area in east of Johannesburg. So I think we're starting to see this, but we're still yet to, I think, understand the full impact of such announcements and agreements.
And how do we move away from our dependence on Chinese commodities, given what's happening now?
So I think that's, we see a lot of South African policymakers now, I think, pointing to the need for industrialization and for beneficiation and possibly focusing on not just primary, the primary sector, and I think that's a very important priority. And so, for example, I know we're looking into the oceans as an example of a way that we can increase income in South Africa.